to a brand new wave, drowning out the noise that's tame. Liberty whispers through the brave, breaking free from every chain. Nullify the rules they crave, crypto beats that pave the way. Anarchy with minds that's safe, algorithms built on to tape. Out of bounds and out of sight, building futures pure and bright. Escape the grip and win the fight. Welcome into the legacy ride. Beyond control we take a stand, casting off the iron brand. Freedom flowing through our hands, revolution's our command. Decentralize the way we plan, all together we expand. Breaking shackles for the clan, in this journey we're unpanned. Out of bounds and out of sight, building futures pure and bright. Escape the grip and win the fight. Welcome into the legacy ride.
Would you do it? Would you die just like them? Would you martyr yourself for something of purpose? I think I would. And I think that's what we're doing right now. Welcome to the 51st edition of Legacy News. I am your host, the legacy of Jennifer and Kaiser. Welcome to a somber edition of Crypto Wednesday.
Hey guys, what's going on?
It's only somber because we're about to dive into the negatives of Breaking Monero, because there are attacks. There's always risks. And so, once again, we're trekking onward, trying to figure this shit out. This is Andrew Joseph, everybody. There is nothing somber about this episode, unless you're just an idiot. Let's get down to learning and educating. You thought I was serious. Did you think I was serious?
I don't know anything about think about what you're saying nowadays. You're crazy.
I'm not crazy.
You're retarded. That's why you're up for retard of the year.
I'm not a retard of the year, dude.
Oh, so I can take the Nano Sweet.
No. There is no retard of the year. It's retard of the century.
Okay. I'll see you at the end of it.
Yeah, which means you'll never win it. It's mine.
My time is up. My time is now. You can't retard.
My
time is now.
You ready to get into this,
Yeah,
Baldy?
you take that back. I was bald.
Anyways, while we watch this, by all means, everybody, if you're in the chat, specifically on X, let's get the YouTube is well, YouTube's just YouTube. So, if you're on YouTube watching this as it premieres, jump in that chat, chit chat, start some conversation. But if you're on X, which the majority of you do watch on X, let's get that chat live. Start having conversations with each other while we're watching these videos. So I want to see a live interactive chat. So and then while you're at it, after the video's done, since the bulk of you watch on X, head over to our YouTube, subscribe if you haven't, and leave a comment because it helps with the algorithm. It helps us. It really does. It helps us with the algorithm, gets us pumped up, and then you can continue your conversation that we want you to have in the chat, but in the comments for everybody to see, so we can get this information out because the message is clear. We just don't have enough people hearing it. So with that, Andrew, get that video up and running. This is episode 9. Welcome to Crypto Motherfucking Wednesday. Free
Yes, sir.
RogerNow.org. Head to it. Let's get it real set up. It's Legacy News, Crypto Wednesday.
Welcome back to Breaking Monero. This is our 9th episode on poisoned outputs, or the EAE attack, or NAC attack. It's given several names, and we are here to discuss this pretty, honestly, difficult and nuanced topic to talk about, so we'll do our very best. We're here with me, Justin. We're here with Suray and Sarang. It's great to have everyone here on. So this video is going to be diagram heavy. So if you're watching this on like a podcast, we'd recommend watching it in video form later if you're confused, because there's really a lot of stuff going on. But first, we're going to have Suray talk about like what's the general idea of sort of marked funds that we're sort of talking about, and then I can jump into the diagrams to explain the situation to you all.
All right, so here is a thought experiment for everybody in the Breaking Monero audience. Let's say that you are living in an oppressive society and you want to buy some banned books. And let's say that you have a local banned book dealer who stands on the corner, and you can go give them cash and they will give you your Bible or your To Kill a Mockingbird or whatever copy of banned textbook that you want. Now, one question you might have is, how would this tyrannical government come to the conclusion that you are a purchaser of these devices? Or rather, how would they go about tracking the person who is supplying all of these banned books, these nasty little devices, to society? Well, one way to do it, and this is how law enforcement has done this, you know, this is like good old-fashioned police work going back hundreds of years. You'd go do a controlled purchase from one of the street dealers. You go buy a book 6 or 7 times in a row, and then you look for bank deposits at local banks. And what will end up happening is this street dealer will go give the cash to his boss or one of his boss's minions, who will then hand it over to the boss, and then eventually it'll make its way into a deposit at a bank account. And if those dollar bills that were used to purchase the banned books were marked, the bank will alert law enforcement, and they will have found their kingpin boss who is depositing money from these controlled purchases. So the essential idea is person A is purchasing, person E is purchasing something from oh man, I screwed it up. So the main thing is that somebody is buying a book, and there's going to be a chain of custody of the money that will eventually end up in some know your customer bank's hands. And once that money ends up in the bank's hands, they can start linking real life identities with those original purchases and find the interior hops of those transactions. And unfortunately, this is a problem that Monero faces. I'll hand this back to Justin.
Excellent. So we're going to take a look at this attack in a little bit more detail, just to show people what it is. Now, again, a warning: this is very this is a very heavy series of slides, so sort of brace for impact here. And I'm going to try and get my cursor up here, laser pointer, perfect. So as discussed, you have person Eve that is sending funds to a specific address. The address with Monero 43, whatever, goes on forever. And they're learning information when this person then takes funds and puts it on an exchange or some other colluding entity. It doesn't matter what these entities are. All that matters is that Eve is colluding with the exchange, or this party A is colluding with party B. Again, it doesn't matter who these parties specifically are. So let's say Eve sent a transaction to that address. They create a ring signature as shown here. They use their real output here that's related to Eve. And then they create a transaction with two outputs. One output is given to that address. We'll call it output A. And the other address, let's say, is given back to Eve. So Eve doesn't worry about this. She's not trying to track this output. Ultimately, let's say that Eve comes back, looks at the blockchain, and notices that there are 3 transactions that have this output in their ring signature. These are not associated by time or anything. Let's just say there are 3 transactions. And let's say, like this first one, again, it uses A. The second one uses A. They all use this one output. These are all the transactions on the Monero blockchain that use this output. And we're not sure necessarily that A is truly spent in these ring signatures. It could be a decoy in all 3, but they're still trying to learn information about what the situation is. So let's say for the second transaction here, for instance, that someone deposited this output on an exchange. This one yellow output here was sent to an exchange, and Alice was the person who sent the funds to the exchange. So for this EAE example, you have Eve as the first E, you have Alice in the middle, and then you have the exchange on the last portion here. So what we have to note here is, like, the exchange might suspect in conjunction with Eve that Alice is the holder of this Monero address. Now, this is a heuristic. It's not very strong, especially if there's only one instance here. We don't really know what the real case here is, right? It could be that Alice just used this output in the sort of ring, used this output as a decoy in the ring. And if this only happens once, there's a pretty high chance that high probability that this just happened by chance, that Alice is not the true person who holds this address. But if this happens twice, or 3 times, or 4 times, well, now you're starting to get a pattern where Eve sends multiple transactions to this address, and then this address has several deposits onto the exchange, all under Alice's account. Well, now the exchange and Eve are starting to learn a lot of information where they can say, okay, the chance that one person that deposits funds on our exchange is able to have a possible really recent spend from the outputs we assign to this address is very low. It's a very, very low probability that this happens by chance. And so as a result, we're going to assume that there's a good enough amount of evidence that Alice is the same person as this address. And it's not the only sort of circumstance that can happen. This graph gets very messy, especially as you add other sort of situations. We're trying to really keep it simple for this episode, while nevertheless keeping, at least discussing some things that can sort of get in the way. So let's say for this ring here, that there is another output that was sent to the exchange, as I'm highlighting here. Well, in this case, maybe this was sent to Charlie, who sent the funds to the exchange. Well, the exchange probably would at least have some suspicion of Charlie, but it's far more likely that in Charlie's case, it happened by chance than in Alice's case had it happened by chance. But it's certainly some limitation of this sort of model. It's a very sort of complex system on how these things get added. Ultimately, it is a statistical test to say, okay, what is the likelihood that this would have happened by chance, or what is the likelihood that this is actually what's going on? And you're going to have type 1 and type 2 error as you conduct these statistical tests. But ultimately, there are certainly ways for them to be much stronger in some circumstances than other circumstances.
Do you mind if I jump in really quick, Justin?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
One thing I want to point out is just to connect this graph to this discussion I mentioned a little bit ago about controlled purchases. One way that you can visualize this is Eve is, for example, a detective who's purchasing banned books online. They've constructed these 4 purchases from this anonymous online vendor, 43WI. And then a couple of months later, or maybe a week later, this exchange notices that Alice makes all 4 of these deposits. The exchange comes to the conclusion that these 4 deposits are probably related to the banned bookseller purchases. The difference is that in Monero, we have these ring signatures that point back to several previous spenders. And so in the cash scenario, I have this linear chain of money going from one person to another person. Here, we have each output is used possibly in multiple ring signatures and is only like probabilistically implicated. So what do you end up having is this exchange is capable of developing this probability profile of Alice.
Yep, exactly. So we can even expand this. We're going to take this example and sort of do a little bit more with it. So let's say instead of Alice sending 4 different transactions to an exchange, she takes even less precaution and decides that she just wants to send one big transaction here. So this one transaction has 4 rings. There are 4 inputs, each with their own rings. And so you see one of these is A, B, C, and D. And then this transaction is deposited on the exchange, again, under Alice's account. Well, now we can be even more clear generally, because you have one transaction. Like, what is the likelihood that a single transaction would contain all of these 4 outputs that are being watched in each independent ring? It's very, very low. And especially as the number of transactions grow that are tracked to one user, it becomes increasingly unlikely. So this is certainly a consideration where Alice, if she was interacting with an exchange, should be concerned about revealing that she is, again, related to this one entity, this address, because it's highly unlikely that anyone else could be in this case. It's very likely that this did not happen by chance. The errors are very low. Now, both of these were sort of with one layer of separation, where you again have like one person who send funds to one intermediary who then sends it on to an exchange. But this could get even more complex, and so I'm going to show an example now where you have more intermediary steps. In this case, I'm only showing 2 because that's about what will fit on a slide. And even so, it's simplified. But this could be much longer depending on what you're really assessing. So again, let's start off with a simple single transaction case. We have Eve here who sends one transaction to this entity. And this output is used, let's say, in 3 transactions. Of course, in all likelihood, it would probably be much more, but for the sake of fitting on the slide, let's say 3. But let's say none of these transactions were deposited on an exchange or deposited on a service that Eve is working with to learn more information. So what Eve might do is say, okay, well, even though I didn't learn anything specifically from these set of transactions, I'm still going to watch these new outputs that are generated. So instead of watching these 3, I mean, I'm still going to watch these 3, but let's say I'm also going to watch these. Well, now each of these outputs independently has a set of, let's again say 3 other transactions where these are spent. So let's say this output was used in these transactions, this output was used in these transactions, and so on and so forth. Let's say in this second layer that there was one transaction here that deposited funds to the exchange. Let's say Eve, who the exchange knows that Eve deposited these funds on the exchange. Well, do they know, or sorry, knows as Alice deposited funds on the exchange. Sorry if I misspoke there. let's say that, so what do Eve and the exchange really know? How good is their test at determining whether or not Alice is really the same person that controls, is really the person that controls this account? And this is similar to the very first situation we went over, except that in this case, there is more ambiguity. You have even less certainty, because now instead of saying, okay, well, there's maybe like 3 transactions that I'm worried about, well, there's a lot more transactions here that you're worried about. The graph gets a lot larger. But Eve can try and learn more information by sending more transactions. So let's say that Eve sends transaction B, sends another transaction with output B. This, again, doesn't come with any initial red flags in the first transactions that immediately use B. But let's say that in the second set of transactions, that there was another deposit to the exchange, and Alice also made this deposit. Well, now the exchange and Eve start to get a little bit more information about who actually deposited these funds, because now you're starting to have enough strength in a statistical model to say, well, now it's unlikely that Alice would have deposited both sources of these funds if they did not receive outputs A and B. So it's really important to show how this grows over time and gets more complicated as you have more layers to this. And to sort of simplify it, I have a nice stupid example here, where we have a transaction tree, and it purposely looks very much like a pyramid here. But let's say that like one user, so for each tree here, this is the depth of an output as it goes on. So you have your initial transaction here that generates outputs, that generate more outputs, so on and so forth. And this tree gets bigger and bigger over time. So if you have 2 people that are involved on both sides of the transaction, again, let's say you have Eve here, sends funds to Alice, who then sends funds to an exchange really early on. Well, there's not a very deep transaction graph. And so Eve and the exchange have at least a decent idea. They can do a statistical test that has a pretty high degree of probability. But if there's only one test that's all the way down here, there's a ton of other entropy that could occur. The statistical test is far weaker. But if a user does this twice, so that sure, it might be deep down in the transaction trees, but there are several trees that they can collect information from, well, then the test starts to become stronger again. So ultimately, in summary, and this can be applied to really any sort of application of these statistical tests, the more points of information that the user has, so the more trees that Eve, the exchange, or any sort of observer is able to construct, and the further up the tree that the outputs are, or ornaments, maybe in this picture example, right, the better the statistical test. So as users have, as you have more instances of information about a user, and as there's less ambiguity for those sets of information, the statistical tests get stronger. And so now you sort of at least should understand the very basics about what an EAE or a poisoned output set of attacks are. It's the case where users try to construct as many, they try to be associated with as many of these trees as possible, and to try and learn as much observable information from it as possible so that they can really get actionable information. And with that, I am done ranting.
I just want to say one quick thing, actually. If I guess that we're not going to be able to go back to the diagram while I'm talking. So one interesting thing is that, as Justin says, if you go to the bottom of the tree, right, the intuition is that you're going to be more likely to be hidden by obscurity, right? Security by obscurity as you get down lower to the tree, because you have more hops as you go down into the tree. You have more and more options. But one of the interesting things about these trees is that if you go really, really deep, they get scraggly and unhealthy, and they don't have a nice full base like a good tree does. And so they get less dense as you go further down. So even though it seems like the further deep you go, the safer you are, if you go too deep, you may also be creating problems for yourself. And that's just one of these interesting properties of these tree structures. I just wanted to throw that out there.
All right, thanks, Surya. So Sarang, can you talk a little bit about something about like how these attacks sort of get harder, what some of the implications are in a little bit more detail about like how the statistical probabilities for these tests sort of gets or is determined?
Right. Well, I mean, so they're determined by a few different things, right? So you kind of talked about two different aspects. You talked about the number of trees, which of course, in part, that just kind of depends on how the adversary Eve is doing controlled purchases that may be out of your control depending on your circumstances. But one parameter that we do in fact control that we talked about pretty frequently is ring size. Ring size, of course, is the number of different outputs that you're kind of throwing around in each ring, which affects in some ways the level of plausible deniability you have that you're the spender of a particular transaction. So in that particular circumstance, the idea of kind of working your way down this tree and changing the ring size can in some ways almost kind of affect the width of these different trees. So in particular, every single time that you kind of go one layer deep on the tree, a bigger ring size will, in general, kind of depending on transaction volume and things like that, affect kind of how wide the tree is, and therefore kind of how many different paths there are that could lead an adversary toward the statistical model of what's going on. So all other things being equal, an increase in the ring size can, in fact, make this a bit harder for the adversary, depending on how it's done. And of course, the number of times that you send funds to another entity, and of course, the idea of what's called churn is just sending the funds to yourself, basically brings you kind of deeper and deeper down into this tree, which of course may lead you to believe, well, okay, in that case, why don't I just send funds to myself a bunch of different times before I eventually go to the exchange? Then I'm far enough down the tree, and we said that that's good. But of course, the way that you actually go about doing those transactions, the timing that you use, for example, that could also, in effect, leak information if it's not done safely. So, timing data, that may be available to others looking at the chain, or to your ISP, who knows when you're online and things like that. Different types of metadata like that can affect the way that churn is done, which is why when people say, how often should I churn and how should I do it? It's kind of a tricky question because it depends a lot on your threat model and how you go about timing it. So those are kind of two interesting parameters that kind of affect the way that these little trees are structured.
So what about the point where, like, so how do you sort of avoid this type of problem though? But like, do larger ring sizes alone sort of help with this, where users don't need to care, or even with large ring sizes, do users need to care?
Well, I guess you can kind of take this to an extreme, right? The idea that, suppose that the ring size kind of got, as big as it could possibly get. That is, suppose that every possible output was a possible decoy, and that every possible output would be used as a possible decoy. Then you kind of run into this large anonymity set situation that other, like ZeroCoin or, Zcash type protocols and assets have, which in that circumstance, you're pretty much as good as you can get. Everything is equally probable as a spender, and trying to build this tree would be, absolutely incomprehensible. So to some extent, it does become really good, but it's ring size in our particular case is a parameter that does affect things like transaction time and transaction size. So it definitely needs to be balanced against what we believe the possible benefit could be. It's definitely not a one size fits all answer for what the ideal ring size should be. It's tough. It's tough and tricky.
And then we also want to make clear that the examples that I showed were not exhaustive, right? There's a ton of different other nuances or different things we could have thrown in there that would either make the statistical tests far more or less accurate in practice. Imagine if they start bringing IP address metadata in, where they're going to be like, well, these transactions were also sent from this IP, or it's going to get far more involved. Or what if there's many people making deposits on the exchange, and so therefore there's a ton of different users that have similar behavior? Well, then it's going to become weaker. And so it's certainly, it's not just a really sort of simple answer we can have here for you based off how it all works, because users can come up with whatever sort of statistical tests. They can pull in any other outside information in conjunction with this. So it's all fine and good for us to look at the blockchain and be like, oh, well, absent external information, this. But again, that's not really the case. And of course, even in this sort of attack that we described, Eve's involvement, the initial person sending the poisoned outputs that they're tracking, that still is sort of like external information by itself. So we're still testing an external information parameter. So
yeah, that's actually a really good point. One of the main things is that these E characters, exchanges and Eve, the fact that they know that they are sending these transactions to this one suspicious address in the first place, that's not information that hits the blockchain. They just know that. That's external. In addition to that, to elaborate on Sarang's point about ring sizes being sort of counterintuitive, and elaborating on your point that if you pick your own metric or heuristic, then you're going to draw a different conclusion. You can look at a variety of anonymity metrics and apply them to Monero. And what's interesting is that some of them have some counterintuitive results. For example, increasing ring size once it's bigger than like 5 or 6, it seems, I think the threshold is 8 or 9, gives you these reduced returns according to certain anonymity metrics. But then sometimes if the blockchain, according to other anonymity metrics, the blockchain getting larger alone is enough to reduce the anonymity metric. And so like balancing the ring size, the heaviness of the blockchain, and all of these properties in order to guarantee people you have a negligible probability of your transactions being traced, it's not really functionally possible currently. But especially because you can draw different conclusions using different metrics.
All right, Sarang, do you have any big takeaways for people who are watching this episode? We sort of discussed like what this is and the fact that it's nuanced, but what are the takeaways for people that are just watching?
So, I mean, some of the big takeaways, right, are that a lot of this, as with so many other things, really depends on your threat model. You know, like we had said, you know, the kind of the many different forms of this attack kind of assume that you have kind of cooperating entities on both sides, right? You know, you have some kind of KYC AML exchange that, you know, knows who you are when you're doing deposits. You know, and you might have another entity on the other side colluding with that exchange who's maybe making controlled purchases. So, you know, if you are concerned about that, you know, part of it has to do with, you know, knowing the entities with whom you're interacting, if possible. Obviously, in some situations in threat models, you may not be able to, you know, have more control over what those entities are and what they're doing. So, you know, basically, if we can reduce the number of E's, like the exchanges and the Eves and whatever kind of word we want to use for those, you know, ideally, the more we can get rid of those, the better. But again, that's not necessarily always possible. You know, some users in certain circumstances may be able to, you know, may have a lot of choices over how they're doing deposits or from whom they're accepting funds, but others might not.
So what about plausible? Can you speak, I suppose I can give this to Brandon. Can you speak about sort of like the idea between plausible deniability? We've already discussed this in previous episodes, but with this sort of statistical test, do people still have the plausible deniability provided by ring signatures? And you're muted.
Yeah, I sure was. Yeah, so the thing is all right, so going back to what Sarang said a moment ago about a threat model, if your threat model is that your tyrannical nation is going to shoot you if there is a probability of more than 50% that they can link you with this transaction on the Monero blockchain, I would say maybe don't use blockchains at all, because you're going to be in a similar probability category as if you use Zcash, if you use any other blockchain. You're probably, if your threat model is that you're going to be punished just for probabilistically even using the technology, then it's not really going to help you out. On the other hand, if your threat model is one of plausible deniability, like Justin asks, and you are living in a nation with like a rule of law where you would be prosecuted in a court and you could demonstrate there are 10,000 additional transaction histories, none of which include my alleged transactions. They just pulled this random transaction history out of the space of all transaction histories, and they're accusing me of it. If you can make that plausible deniability argument, then Monero is fantastic. And honestly, if you can't make that argument, then even cash is dangerous, like physical cash. So in terms of plausible deniability, I would always look at cryptocurrency technology as a plausible deniability technology, not as a way of hiding your transactions forever. On a certain level, we're in an arms race with the people who want to learn your financial information, and we're trying to protect you guys as fast as possible, or as much as possible. But like, black holes leak information about their contents. The idea that we would be able to define a blockchain that will protect people forever from the most extreme threat model, where a government is going to nab you if you have a 15% chance that you were guilty, then we have a completely different situation on our hands than finance.
Okay, thanks, Brandon. So, Sarang, last question then. So, is moving past ring signatures still something that is necessary long term, or is it reasonable for us just to make the ring size like 100 or whatever?
So, again, increasing the ring size such that we have, a ton of different path possibilities in this big tree that makes it, very, very improbable that, an adversary who's not doing a ton of controlled purchases would be able to do that. Is it possible? Yes. In theory, we can increase the ring size to basically be whatever we want, depending on, how you do the selection of decoys and things like that. But of course, that increases the size of transactions, which has scaling issues. It also increases the verification time of transactions, which has scaling issues. So, to some extent, this is always kind of a balance game about this. To what benefit is it? You probably have to increase the ring size, fairly substantially to be able to, get like a negligible probability of this ever being an issue. So that's unfortunate. And of course, that's why the research community right now is really big in kind of taking rings out of the picture entirely to go to more complete anonymity sets. Something like Zcash and the protocols that they are based on, for example, when used correctly, are able to offer, excellent anonymity sets, complete anonymity sets. But of course, we know that has trade-offs. It has trade-offs in kind of the whole trusted setup aspect, and Zcash has had issues with that in the past. So there's always trade-offs to this. Whether or not we'll be able to find something relatively soon that's able to kind of do away with all those trade-offs, that's uncertain. A lot of people are looking into it, and as I've always said, I personally look forward to the day when we don't have to deal with these anonymity set problems anymore. So we can continue trying to iterate as best we can until the entire ecosystem gets there.
Okay, thank you so much, Sarang and Surrey, for joining me today for this very difficult episode, frankly, on poison outputs, EAE attack, NAC attack, whatever you want to call it. There's tons of different names, and there's tons of different circumstances where it could be applied. So I think this serves as a good episode for sort of understanding how people should look at how their sort of transaction tree is growing as they use Monero, and keep that in mind. And beyond that, make sure to draw comparisons between this episode and other episodes with what other information you're giving an observer to look at information about higher standing transactions. All right, that's all from us today. Thanks for watching. Take care, everybody.
See ya.
He's awake. He's awake. No, he's asleep.
Oh. You said that to try to get this done in a half an hour, and the video itself was a half an hour. Holy shit. That was interesting.
I know. It was.
That was interesting. One thing that they keep on plugging away, though.
They're putting us over? They're putting us over?
They're putting us over. But one thing that they keep plugging away is this idea of balance and risk assessment. So what is it using the blockchain with Monero and the idea of assessing your risk when it comes to security features of transactions on the exchange?
Well, I mean, okay, you say you're doing an exchange, right? I remember seeing a news article. I'm not advocating this. I'm just saying this is what the news article was talking about somebody who had hired a hitman, and they said, "Oh, I want to be paid in Monero." So the person went signed up for an exchange, bought some Monero, sent it to the address, and man in the middle attack. The exchange was there to witness the transaction, and the guy got arrested for trying to hire a hitman. Obviously, he didn't know the guy and didn't know he was a cop.
Yeah.
So you're not gonna,
Well,
you if you're that stupid as to go, do something like that, then you probably were gonna get caught no matter what you used as a medium of exchange and a store value.
Man, probably deserve to go to prison on that one because you just hired a hitman or tried to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's negative effects to the blockchain, just like with any market. I mean, you're going to have your pros and your cons. Don't say that Monero, well, it's for criminals. Like everybody's a criminal when it comes to the government, buddy.
We're
3
all
felony.
flawed.
The average American commits at least 3 felonies a day because we don't know. We don't know the laws.
They're
But,
so over delivered on the laws. It's not even funny. So I talked about that a couple
Mhm.
weeks ago on the World Blockchain Roundtable. Check us out Thursdays at 11 p.m. Or 11 a.m. Eastern.
Not 11 p.m. Yeah, now they're going to be waiting at 11 p.m. So, but yeah, 11 a.m. Eastern. But speaking of KYC, know your customer, and all these controlled, centralized exchanges like Coinbase or Binance, et cetera, what is the best thing about Monero in its blockchain exchange, for its counter mechanism?
Well, okay. Could you give me a little bit more details of what you mean by the question?
Well, how about this? I'll reword the question. How do we counter KYC controlled mechanisms, their models with Monero?
There's mechanisms because of the way Monero is designed that you can connect to decentralized exchanges and trade alternative cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin Core for Monero, and then send that off to a non-exchange address, and that's a way and it's called coin mixing. They've been doing that since the beginning. Actually, when the Silk Road was around the FBI, the FBI, they sent Bitcoin Core through mixers to hide their tracks. So it's not like this is a one-sided thing and people just want privacy. No, that this is what they do. This is what everybody does who's ever wanted privacy. Said they're going to look for exchanges and ways to exchange currencies privately. The way I think about it is this. I think it was I know it was a World War II movie. I think The Man in the High Castle. I can't remember for sure. It's been a long time since I've seen it. But they were trying to pass the Germans, and they were saying, "Oh, I'm from a specific part of Germany," and they were doing their best, but because they weren't from Germany, they could pick up that there was some suspicious behavior afoot. So even
Man on
the
the
best,
high castle, huh?
I think that's what
That's
it's been a long
that's
time.
in America.
Right.
That's in
Okay.
America.
Well,
I
World War
implore
II
you.
movie.
It's not a World War II movie. It's post World War II. It's an alternative ending if the Germans and the Japanese won. But there's a story within the story. I implore everybody to read that novel by Philip K. Dick, The Man in the High Castle. Then go watch the Amazon Prime. I think it's a 3-season series. You'll catch the difference within the series and the book. I think the book is done. The book is extraordinary better, in my opinion. It is. It's like a story within a story where they find this book. There's this book out there, and this is where The Man in the High Castle comes into play. But it's telling an alternative story of what is real history, of what actually happened, and who actually won World War II. But what's cool about The Man in the High Castle, though, is you have Germany and the Axis powers won, and Germany and Japan took over their sides of the United States, like the Western. You have the Pacific states of America out west that Japan occupied and annexed into their empire. You have all of the eastern side, east of the Rockies. Well, actually, Mississippi is part of Germany. It's interesting. So it's like part of the German Empire, the Third Reich, and then you have like in the Rockies, like in between the plains to the Rockies, it's like no man's land. So like anything pretty much goes. And so yeah, it's kind of like anarchy.
Yeah.
And that's actually where the Germans and the Japanese like to send their assets in to do bad stuff. But that's also
Hmm.
where the resistance it grows stronger against the powers that be, because you have this decentralized no man's land. I forget exactly what the territory is called, and they're pretty much positioned out of Denver. But check that movie out. But speaking of that though, and talking about layers, and like the layers of like the Third Reich over on the East Coast, or the Japanese Empire on the West Coast, and then the no man's land territory, all the unorganized territory in between. Could it be that the more layers, comparing it to the blockchain, the more layers used in a specific output, the stronger that security could be within a transaction?
Not necessarily, because if you stick out too much like a sore thumb, then you're gonna draw attention to yourself. It's a very nuanced thing.
Just like what he said about the trees, it doesn't always mean
Yeah.
that the deeper you go into the roots does not necessarily mean that you're gonna be safe. So
Heaven and
the
earth, right?
deeper you, hmm So, and with that, one last thing though, big and smaller transactions. What are the difference between the two, and how do they perpetually advance a transaction in their different outputs?
Well, I mean, if you're gonna send a large transaction in a small transaction, it's really because of the way it breaks up. It's kind of hard for them to distinguish, because it, they go they integrate with other transactions, so you don't know for sure which one is actually, you know, you can't follow it directly, because it integrates, like I said, with other transactions, is like false positives. So people might think in this exchange, it might think that you just somebody who holds a lot that's sending it from one wallet to another, or it just depends. I mean, this is all speculation, right? And
And
it's
it all
not
goes
real.
back to the
It's
term.
not realistic. It's not
Yeah.
realistic that you're going to be making such a large transaction repeatedly.
And it all goes back to the terminology that we've learned from earlier episodes, brought back yet again, mentioned yet again, plausible deniability. So I'm going to give all of you viewers homework this week. I want you to look up and review and be able to define what plausible deniability means, specifically with blockchain. That's your homework, everybody. This is classwork. This is Teacher Zach.
Sounds like a challenge to me.
So, with that, we have gone way over time. Andrew wanted to get done in a half an hour, and he gives us a fucking episode that's 30 minutes.
I can't help it. I didn't make this video. I just participated in it.
So, Andrew, tell him what's in store for this week with the legacy right for the remainder.
Tomorrow we're going to be at the World Blockchain. I'm sorry, it will be on the World Blockchain Roundtable with Joe Rhodes and Satoshi Sean probably, and Greg and from Revit, and possibly Lycon Lisa. So check us out.
What are we talking about?
Don't forget about the Emperor. We need to lay siege to the Emperor.
That's for you, William. But what is the topic at hand this week on the World Blockchain Roundtable?
I'd have to check.
11 a.m. Eastern on
just
Thursday.
A second. Hold on. Tomorrow's episode is about blockchains meet Main Street with tokenized assets. So that's what we're going to be talking about.
That's what I've been waiting for, man. So tune into that. That's going to be a very interesting topic, because you're taking the blockchain to reality based and what it could be used for on a real world scale. So it's going to be tons of fun, tons of perspective, And so don't miss World Blockchain Roundtable. That is every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on YouTube and X, the Dragon Chain channel, the Legacy Right channel, Satoshi Sean's channel, Litecoin Lisa's channel. When they're on. So give that a check, give that a follow. Make sure you follow all of us, subscribe to all of us, and set them bells for the notification, because YouTube likes the fuckery. So, and then on Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern, Weekly Legacy is back at it again. The Enogram, we're diving deep. We're going into part 2 of the Enogram, a Christian perspective book. So get ready, get prepared, because this week we're actually going to dive a little bit more into the Enogram traits. So I believe it's this week. But with that, we've gone well over time. This has been an excellent edition of Crypto Wednesday. Stay vigilant. Keep assessing your risk, everybody. And soon you will live long and prosper. Anything else, Andrew?
Just thanks for watching, and thanks for keeping subscribed, and comment and share and like and give us that push. So,
and follow us on Facebook. We're trying to get out there on every social media outlet. So even though Facebook sucks, give us find the Legacy Right on Facebook if you want to take a break from X or YouTube or anything like that, or just stay in the loop. Yeah, you can just stay vigilant. Where the fuck is this exit, dude? Can you ask that very nice man where the exit is, Andrew?
I'm going to have to leave now, but I was sure I came in by that door over there. Hey, man, where's the door to get out of here?
Oh, it's right over there, sir.
Right over where?
The exit sign? Exit sign? It's that door right there.
That red sign?
Yeah, just go right that way.
Okay.
I think it went down the wrong door.
Where am I? Hey, what the fuck's wrong with you? That's not the right door.
Sir, you're going to want to go to the one with the exit. You went to the door to the side there.
I went to the right doors of where you pointed me to, you fuck.
I pointed you to the exit.
Man, you're fucking with the wrong guy.
I'm sorry.
You see this bulge on my hip? You know what that is?
That's a gun.
That's a Glock. You're fucking with the wrong guy.
Yeah.
Don't ever send me to the wrong